Good morning. This is the last day to recognize Black History Month, and I wish there were more time to bring attention to all the wonderful African Americans, composers and musicians, most of whom probably you would recognize as male. But this morning I'd like to recognize, excuse me, a woman by the name of Florence Price, who lived from 1887 to 1953. And Florence Price gained national recognition for her compositions were classical in nature, her piano playing. She was an organist. She was a music teacher. She had an interesting history, born in Arkansas and taught piano by her mother. By the time she was 4, she was playing in a concert, and at age 11, she had a published composition. So she must have been good enough, because she was one of the first African-American women to get into the New England Conservatory of Music. When she graduated there with high honors, she became the head of the music department at Clark Atlantic University, where she met her husband. But in 1927, her family moved to Chicago to escape the Jim Crow conditions there. And in 1932, she won a composition with the Wanamaker Foundation and was picked. Her composition, Symphony in E minor, was chosen as the best among many well-known composers at the time. So in 1933, she was the first American composer, female composer, whose composition was played by the Chicago Symphony at that time. She went on to compose 300 or more compositions, chamber music, organ, anthems, piano pieces. She composed 3 symphonies, 4 piano concerti. So she was quite known as well. In later life, she composed music for her piano students. So she was, I think she should be recognized. And in 1949, she actually composed or arranged some spirituals called I'm Bound for the Kingdom and I'm Walking on My Building. And she dedicated them to Marian Anderson, with whom she was a friend. So this morning, the prelude is one from her larger pieces called Dances in the Canbrakes, and it's called Nimble Feet. So let me see if I can get through this, since I just started to learn it. During the offertory, I'll be playing a lovely little piece that she composed in 1952 called The Sea Swallows. And it was for young pianists learning how to put their hands over each other as they play. So this is Nimble Feet.
Bruce, we're not sure how that happened. Suddenly you were playing and suddenly you were muted.
Okay, well, you got a flavor of it anyhow.
It was delightful, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning. Welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist congregation in Stuart, Florida. Today's February 28th, 2021. My name is Janet Groat. I'm your worship associate today. Our election for board members is coming up. Our nominees are Bill Falk for president and Tia Breeding for member at large. Our park get together is Tuesday, noon at Memorial Park in downtown Stuart. Mask and social distancing, please. We're happy to have Rev Ranwa Hammamy back in our pulpit today. Rev Ranwa, pronouns they and she, serves as the director of the Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry in California. It supports UUs in California with various justice ministries, advocacy, education, and witness opportunities. She also has served as president of diverse and revolutionary Unitarian Universalist multicultural organizations. A self-described UU Muslim, she serves both traditions. When not working, Ranwa enjoys spending time baking absurd concoctions, singing for liberation, and relaxing with their 5 fur babies. Ranwa? Hi. And a big thanks today for those who've helped with this service. Bruce Ruby, our musician who just got muted halfway through the music. Maybe you can pick it up later for us. And a big thanks to Corina Pelloni, our Zoom hostess with the mostest. We are a welcoming congregation. We welcome people of all gender identifications, identities, races, and backgrounds. If you're watching this on a recorded YouTube, we invite you to join us on Zoom. We are holding Zoom services every Sunday at 11 a.m. To get the link, go to our website, tcuuc.org, and sign up for our email newsletter. You'll also get an update for after the service as to content as to what was in this service. Going to light the chalice. At this hour, in single rooms and ornate sanctuaries, many sibling Unitarian Universalist congregations are also lighting the flame. As we light our chalice today, let us remember that we are part of a greater community of faith. May this dancing flame inspire us to fill our lives with the Unitarian Universalist ideals of love, justice, and truth. We, Unitarian Universalists, are defined as a non-creedal church, but we do have our principles. In fact, 7 of them, and an 8th on the way. Today, Let's think about the sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Today, we are told by Maureen Killian that we are called today, from the midst of pain and challenge, we are called to praise the world. From a world that appears broken, we are called to praise life's moments of joy and grace. From time that seems freezing in ongoing exchanges of platitudes and blame, we are called to reach out to those around us. To connect, though, with people we care about and try to make amends with those whom we are estranged. This world is too fragile. There's too much pain. Let us bring our hearts together on this day. Let us praise the mutilated world in all its blessings and all its pain. Bruce is now going to play and sing hymn number 213, There's a Wildness in Your Mercy. Of course, we know Zoom's out of sync, so keep yourself muted, but go ahead and sing.
There's a wildness in your mercy, like the wildness of the sea. There's the kindness in your justice, which is more than liberty. But we made your love too narrow by false limits of our own, and we magnify your strictness, which the few you will not own. For the love of God is broader than the pleasures of our minds, and the heart of the eternal is most wonderfully kind.
We're going to do our affirmation now. Let us recite it, speaking the first verse and singing the second. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
From all the skies, let faith and hope and love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung. On every lip and by every tongue.
Reverend Ranwa is now going to tell us a story for all ages, Muhammad and the woman who threw trash. Ranwa?
Thank you. So as for our story today, I'm sort of drawing on our sources. One of our sources is the words and deeds of prophetic people. And we define prophetic people as people who live their lives according to their values, according to the values of truth, justice, and love, as we are lifting up in this community today. And for those who aren't familiar with Muhammad, Muhammad was a lead central figure in the Islamic traditions, known as the Prophet Muhammad. And for many Muslims, there is the aspiration to live their lives as he lived his. And so this story, there once was an old woman who lived in Mecca and who didn't like the Prophet Muhammad very much at all. Every day, Muhammad would pass the old woman's house on his way to pray, and she would throw trash out of her window onto his head. Yet Muhammad would never complain. He would simply continue on his journey to pray as if nothing had happened. And this continued day after day until one day Muhammad passed by the old woman's house, and to his surprise, no trash landed on his head. Muhammad looked around to see where the old woman was. When he couldn't see her through the window, he became concerned, so he went to the front door of the woman's house and knocked. "Come in," said a weak and feeble voice. When Muhammad entered, he found the old woman in bed looking scared. Was Muhammad going to shout at her or punish her for throwing trash on his head every day? "Don't be scared," Muhammad said. "I'm not here to shout at you." Muhammad quickly realized that the old woman was very sick and unable to leave her bed. He therefore set about cleaning her house and making sure that she had everything she needed to be safe and comfortable. And the old woman, after this, was so impressed by Muhammad's behavior that she decided to never throw trash on his head again. And so as we move into our service, let's think about the ways in which this story teaches us what it means to show mercy in the face of less merciful behavior.
Thank you. Yes, quite a topic we need to adopt today. We're going to do our joys and sorrows. Visualize yourself in the sanctuary, gazing at the altar. See the blue silk flowing from the earthy bowl to a blue glass plate. That silk represents the river of our lives. Rocks roll down that river, representing the milestones of our lives. This is how we share our joys and sorrows. Raise your hand to share, and we will unmute you to speak. Then mute yourself when we're done, and we'll continue to call on others. Again, as usual, please keep your joys and sorrows rather brief, and keep it on the more personal level. I'm going to move one more stone. Sometimes our joys and sorrows are just too hard to articulate, too personal. I'll move a stone for all our heartfelt cares. And now here is Reverend Hammamy. Can be a video.
When the world is sick, can't no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can't no one be well? But I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. Spirit of life, source of love, we are gathered here as a reflection of your greater presence. Your greater presence that flows around us, between us, and through us. Spirit of life, source of love, as we continue to navigate a world filled with sickness, a world filled with grief, a world filled with uncertainty. Help us to remember that within us lie the seeds of hope. Within us lie seeds of resilience. Within us lie seeds of community, care. Spirit of life, source of love, as we are here in virtual community, holding one another in our hearts, yearning for the day when we can hold one another in our arms. We ask that you help us to know that there is always a place to turn in times when we are feeling lonely, when we are feeling hurt or scared. Spirit of life, source of love, source of joy, help us to fully embrace those moments of delight, those moments of celebration, those moments where you show up in your fullness, in our laughter, in our joy, in the richness of our lives. Spirit of life, source of love, however we know you, however we name you, however we feel you, remind us that even though this world is sick, there is a time when we will all be beautiful, strong, and together once more. In all of your names, known and unknown, we pray. Amen.
Another beautiful one, Bruce. Thank you. The offering is a time to reflect on just what it means to be a self-sustaining, life-giving community. What is the meaning of giving, of generosity, of our congregation and its place in the wider community, and in the lives of its members? Where does the money go? What does the money mean? All of these and more are subjects to be reflected upon during the offertory. Thank you, Bruce. Our flame will keep burning, and thank you all for your contributions to this church. Now we're going to have a sermon from Reverend Hammamy.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Bruce, for your beautiful playing this morning. So when I was growing up, prayer was a central part of my family's life. As immigrant Muslims, my parents wanted to make sure that their children, born and raised here in the United States, held firmly to the traditions of their cultures and their families. And like many teenagers, especially teenagers who are third culture kids, those of us that belong to both and neither of the cultures of our families and the cultures we grow up in, I had moments of rebellion. I didn't like to pray. I even would fake my daily prayers, pretending to go through the prayer washing ritual, putting on my head cover and sitting quietly on the prayer rug in my room for about 5 minutes while reading whatever book I had handy to pass the time and pretend to pray. And yet, despite my hardest effort to abandon some of the traditions of my family, some of them stubbornly stuck. One such tradition is the memorization of certain surahs or chapters in the Quran. In particular, one that I've never managed to forget is Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the opening chapter of the Quran and literally means the opening. Al-Fatiha is an incredibly common prayer, not only recited multiple times during each of the 5 daily prayers that many Muslims observe, but at many significant moments in life, such as the death of a relative or a friend, the beginning of a long journey, or the beginning of a really challenging task. And despite my best efforts, it was a pretty commonplace prayer in many of the beginnings or transitions in my life. And these days, I don't say Al-Fatiha that much, but there is absolutely one experience when I know I will recite Al-Fatiha without fail every single time I am in it. About 99% of the time, I will say I have a fluid understanding or relationship with the mystery that some of us call God, the spirit of love, divine, and etc. But in this one instance, this one experience, I revert back to my strict theistic upbringing and need to absolutely say Al-Fatiha for God to hear. It's the one time I'm actually hoping there is some entity listening and looking out for me. And that is whenever I'm about to fly. It seems silly, and even in those moments just before takeoff, when I am praying away, some part of me knows that there isn't much of an impact except my own comfort and ritual need. So why do I literally religiously do it? This need only evolved as I grew older and realized how little was in my control. When I board a plane, when I fasten my seatbelt, when I stay seated until the captain turns off the fasten seatbelt sign and I can stand in line for the bathroom, there is so much beyond my control. I am at the mercy of forces that I am trusting to keep me safe and supported. The skills of the pilots, the working order of the machinery of the plane, the weather. In that moment, I am putting my trust in people and structures and forces that have some degree of power over my comfort and safety. I am largely at their mercy when it comes to whatever help or harm I encounter in my travel. And in the midst of all that fear and anxiety of flying, those prayers give me comfort. Naming the reality of what is beyond my control, elaborating on the words of Al-Fatiha with my own prayers for the plane's mechanical soundness, the hearts, minds, eyes, and hands of the flight crew, the air surrounding us and carrying us to our destination. It also reminds me of just how much holds me in its care, in its love, and in its mercy. At the start of every prayer, including Al-Fatiha, there is a phrase, a declaration that encompasses so much of the Islamic traditions that I grew up in. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of the God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Throughout the Quran and emphasized especially in Surah Al-Fatiha is this merciful, compassionate nature of God, of the divine. And that depth of mercy is even more understood if we look at the Arabic behind it. The words for all merciful and most compassionate, Rahman and Rahim, they share the same root, Rahm, which translates to womb. Like the womb of someone who is pregnant, the mercy of God or the divine is all-encompassing. It surrounds us, it cares for us, supports us, nurtures us. Like a fetus developing in a womb, we are at the mercy of forces that have power over our safety and well-being. We are dependent on care and love we receive without even knowing its fullness. Islamic theologians like William Chittick suggest that the realm of nature, the universe in its entirety, is this divine womb. In his reflections on the teaching of the Quran, Shah Kazemi describes these names of God in the Islamic traditions as, quote, giving voice to the creative impulse of divine love. Mercy, as a reflection of a divine womb, is rooted in the values of creation rather than destruction, connection rather than separation, and care rather than disregard. And as another scholar, Masheed Ansari, writes in his own analysis of the nature of mercy in the Quran, mercy seeks to counterbalance the chaotic nature of the world today and focus on a real light that enables us to see and find this attribute of the divine, and to also live and manifest this attribute as the prophets and saints have done in all of our traditions. Ansari's words remind us that by our very existence, we are reflections of life, spirit, source. Our presence, our lives, they are the enactment and embodiment of that creative impulse of divine love. Within the Islamic traditions, one might say we are the will of God. Our actions, when aligned with the values of mercy and compassion, are the enactment of the holy. Put another way, we are created by life to be life and to be stewards of and care for life. We hold so much power and responsibility, and yet we are still at the mercy of many things beyond our control, held by so much beyond our understanding. This reality, it can be a source of fear, but it can also be a cause for incredible gratitude, awe, and humility. I'm reminded of this reality in a fairly well-known hymn. Let us break bread together on our knees. As I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, Lord, have mercy on me. This hymn, it captures within it the awe, the gratitude, the surrender to those forces and powers beyond us, outside of our control, that birthed us, that brought us into being, and that continue to sustain us. And when we come to understand all of the mercy that surrounds us, we are better equipped to reflect and embody it ourselves. Some of you may be familiar with the writing and work of the author and environmentalist Wendell Berry. Well, in his own description and reflection on the Islamic traditions, he writes that mercy seems to involve one in a labor of self-knowledge, and then the knowledge of others that is endlessly humbling. He writes, when we realize that we ourselves are in need of those things we are called upon to give to others, we are more willing to practice the challenging depths of our mercy that our universalism calls upon us. We realize that mercy is also our responsibility to give, not only receive, as reflections of that same divine love that has mercy on us. So in its own roundabout way, the humility that comes from naming the mercy that we receive, it's what also allows us to name the power we have to enact the mercy through our own words and deeds. The UU minister, Reverend Marlon Lavenhar, writes that mercy involves power. To show mercy to you, I must have something to offer you that I can choose to either give or withhold. Mercy is a way of using our power to show love and compassion. And that power can take many forms, and frankly, the nature of power itself is a whole source of a whole year's worth of sermons. But in the context of mercy, choosing to use that power to show love and compassion is perhaps the most essential element. And going back to the Islamic traditions, we remember that story with the Prophet Muhammad and his demonstration of mercy. In our story, the Prophet Muhammad showed mercy in a situation where he could have chosen something else. He chose to show love and compassion to someone who had refused to do the same. And in doing so, it gave her an opportunity to follow suit. By choosing mercy, by choosing to show love and compassion, Muhammad claimed his power in that moment and used it to remind the woman that she could use her power in relationship to Muhammad differently as well. In another story, Muhammad is said to have told his followers, help your brother, whether he is oppressed or an oppressor. His followers, confused, asked, it is right to help the oppressed, but how do we help the oppressor? And Muhammad simply replied, by helping them to no longer oppress. Now, obviously, there's much more complexity to that work than simply saying, stop oppressing. But underlying that teaching is an awareness that when we are able to show mercy, recipients who are willing to see it may be more willing to engage it themselves in the future. To give you a more personal example, when I was in seminary, I lived in a dorm setting where around 20 of us shared a single kitchen. We each had 2 cabinets where we could store our pantry, our food, our cookware, those kind of things, and a shelf in the fridge for our perishables. So some pretty tight, small shared spaces. Well, one evening, I was feeling particularly stressed. I went to grab my kitchen pot and make my dinners for the week, and it was nowhere to be found. I tore that kitchen apart, and I admit I was not on my best behavior, muttering, slamming cabinet doors, and feeling righteously offended by what felt like a huge violation of my personal space. After about 10 minutes of this, I huffed my way into the adjacent common room where a couple of my classmates were sitting and visiting family members, and angrily asked them if they had seen my pot. Obviously, they hadn't. But I still ranted about it going missing, eventually resigning myself to using one of the many communal pots available for cooking. The next day, I got a knock on my dorm room door. It was my classmate who had been in the common room that evening. And showing mercy, compassion, and love, she explained to me how my actions that evening had been hurtful to her and her family. My classmate and her family are Black, and my aggression and tone that evening came across as accusatory, as though I had believed that one of them had taken my pot. She patiently explained to me how my actions, even if not intended as such, were anti-Black. I was angry, I was hostile, and even if not intending to, I was accusing them of theft. I had used my power that evening in a way that deprived them of safety and welcome, instead leaning into the more wrathful and angry side of my humanity. It was my classmate who showed me mercy the next day with her actions to approach me, not necessarily knowing the response that she would get. Would I double down? Would I deny it? Would I accuse her of being too sensitive? She chose mercy by claiming her truth and bringing it to me. She chose mercy by choosing to trust that I could learn from her and be changed by her story and experience. She chose mercy by inviting me to consider the power that I have as a person of color that can still perform and engage in a harmful anti-Blackness, and how I can and must choose differently if I am to embody that creative impulse of divine love. My classmate showed me mercy by inviting me to realize that I had caused harm, holding me accountable to it, and encouraging me to learn and teach from that experience. She showed me mercy by her choice to love, not by letting the harm go unchecked, but by challenging me to own it, to repair it, and to learn from it. She helped this oppressor in that moment begin to no longer oppress and practice a mercy of my own. In today's world where there is so much oppression that I'm sure will be discussed in political conversation at coffee hour, where there is so much systemically reinforced suffering, what is our relationship and responsibility to the practice and experience of mercy? One of my favorite teachers, Adrienne Murray Brown, who I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in a previous sermon, an author, an activist, a doula, an artist, a scholar, she offers us the language of a principled struggle, which she describes as when we are struggling for the sake of something larger than ourselves and are honest and direct with each other while holding compassion. It is when we take responsibility for our own feelings and actions and seek deeper understanding before responding. If as Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, then mercy must be understood as something that is not only reserved for those who are deserving of it, which, I'll be honest, is a really hard and humbling pill to swallow, and real talk, some days I kind of want to spit that pill out. There is rightful hesitation around the idea that mercy is for everyone, when there are some in our world who engage in such tremendous abuses of power, such tremendous neglect, that it would be unjust and frankly violent to ask survivors and victims of their harm to show them love and compassion. As Adrienne Murray Brown writes, shaming behaviors of abuse in a culture where they have been normalized is and has been a necessary survival technology. So there are some things we need to loudly say no to, which is in and of itself an act of mercy, a claiming of our power to show our anger in response to harm, a claiming of our power to show our refusal to allow violations of human dignity to go unchecked, and a claiming of our power to refuse to ignore when someone has strayed so far away from that creative impulse of divine love and have become a destructive force of hell and hate. So yes, we do need to be aware of the danger of mercy being misused or exploited by harm doers who refuse to acknowledge the power they hold or use that power in a way that harms others with no way of their being able to avoid it. Mercy doesn't excuse the behaviors of people who intentionally use their power to injure or have exerted power over as an intentional means of oppressing or denying the worth and dignity of others. Recent public figures who maybe have made calls for healing and unity while denying any responsibility for the division and dehumanization that they continue to intentionally sow are maybe not quite ready to receive mercy. And then there are some for whom mercy is well overdue. While there are interpersonal and individually based means of practicing mercy, those cannot have their fullest impact without also examining the systems and structures being challenged in a public light more and more through the lens of mercy in a faithful form. In another book, We Will Not Cancel Us, Brown quotes the teacher Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who asks, "Instead of asking whether anyone should be locked up or go free, why don't we think about why we solve problems by repeating the kind of behavior that brought us the problem in the first place?" And she's talking about mass incarceration. Mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex, the racism inherent to our police structures, they are one place that desperately needs us to engage and dismantle with our reflections of sacred mercy. Just a couple of years ago, UUs around the country engaged in a common read of Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson that took a deep and painful look at the violence perpetuated by the prison industrial complex, particularly against Black individuals and communities. Stevenson describes his book about how we easily condemn people in this country and the injustice we create when we allow fear, anger, and distance to shape the way we treat the most vulnerable among us. Our systems of incarceration and policing, they are designed to, quote, communicate our toughness, he writes, and reduce people to their worst acts and permanently label them as the worst decisions they have ever made. Our systems of incarceration and policing, the prison industrial complex that seeps into our schools and financial institutions, fail to acknowledge how our power as a society, especially those with economic and racial privilege, has been used to maintain and cause more harm to the most vulnerable and oppressed in our communities. Stevenson writes that each of us is more than the worst thing we have ever done. And if we genuinely affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, then we must affirm that of everyone. Even those individuals who have not put much distance between themselves and who have put so much distance between themselves and their inherent dignity with their action. Mercy sees that distance and knows that if an individual is willing to acknowledge that they have harmed and are willing to repair as best they can the harm that they have caused, then there is a way back to that inherent worth and dignity through our compassion and love that provides the teaching, the accountability, and the relationship to help them find their way. So what keeps us from showing that mercy in those instances when it's possible that someone would be open to naming how they have harmed? When we have an opportunity to demonstrate power in a compassionate way? Brown writes, we are fearful of taking the time to be discerning, because then we may have to recognize that we aren't as skilled as we want and need to be, or that some of us could be seen as harm doers. Mercy means that we need to acknowledge that we may not be as innocent as we think as well, that we act in ways that mean we need mercy and compassion ourselves. And sadly, we know our criminal justice system is nowhere near merciful. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Rather than interrogate the circumstances that might lead individuals to engage in what has been categorized as unlawful or even harmful behavior, or engage our fellow human beings with the basic curiosity or compassion, Stevenson writes that incarceration became the answer to everything. Healthcare problems like drug addictions, poverty that led someone to write a bad check, child behavioral disorders, and more are not treated with an awareness of our power to provide compassion and care that addresses the root needs behind these actions. Rather, we abuse our power as a society and punish those most vulnerable because it is easier and allows us to avoid any sense of culpability or complacency in their circumstances. With mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex, those of us with racial and economic privilege are able to hold tightly to our victim role rather than acknowledge the scary and painful truth that we could be harm doers too. Mercy, in all of its forms, would hold us in recognition of the fact that we are all harmed and cause harm. Or as Stevenson writes, we all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. There is strength in naming our brokenness, power in claiming it, and mercy in doing something compassionate with it. So in light of that reality, we must hear the increasing calls from organizers, Black and brown communities, and immigrants to defund the police, abolish prisons, abolish ICE. We must hear these calls as an invitation to practice a sacred mercy. They are calls for us to acknowledge how power has been used to cause harm, identify a more compassionate power rooted in our shared brokenness, humility, and humanity, and transform our toughness into curiosity, accountability, care, and mercy. The calls to dismantle these systems of centuries-long racial and economic oppression and abuse are not designed to lead to chaos. They are intended to bring us back into relationship with each other, our common humanity, and our creative impulse for divine love. Towards the end of his book, Stevenson reminds us that our interconnected and interdependent existence is central to our practice and experience of mercy. He reminds us that even as we are caught in a web of hurt and brokenness, we're also in a web of healing and mercy. It is messy, it is hard, it is sacred, and it is exactly what we need to be, where we need to be in our shared journey of humanity. Our intricately woven connections to each other, our patient willingness to help one another return to our inherent worth and dignity, our humility to know we will be on the receiving end of compassionate accountability on multiple occasions. They are what will help us create a more just, peaceful, and merciful world. And as we continue to reflect on our call to be merciful, to be just, I invite us to carry that spirit into singing our hymn, number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People.
We are gentle, angry, healing people. We seeking people, and we are singing for our lives. We are justice seeking people, and we are singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing for our lives. We are gay and straight together. We are singing for our lives. We are gay and straight together. We are singing for our lives. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing for our lives. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing for our lives.
As we move forward with our day and our week, let us remember that within each of us, we carry not only the seeds of hope, the seeds of love, and the seeds of possibility, but the seeds of a greater divine mercy that knows the path to healness involves holding each other in loving accountability, holding our world in compassionate grace, and holding our world in a gentle, angry mercy. And after the postlude, I invite you to please place yourselves in gallery mode and stay for us for our coffee hour time.
I don't think we can end Black History Month without recognizing those African-American giants who developed the musical genre of jazz. My parents loved jazz, and I grew up listening to those 78s. They had a big collection. So I'll try to do this jazz piece. My father, 50 years ago, when I was a teenager, I was playing Bach and Beethoven, and he said, "Bruce, why don't you ever play jazz?" So I went to the piano teacher and got some jazz, played it, tried my best, and Dad said, "Bruce, I don't think you'll ever be able to play jazz. You have no sense of rhythm." So I've struggled since then, but this morning, the postlude, I've chosen a piece by Ellington, and it's actually Mercer Ellington, who was Duke Ellington's son, who took over his father's band after Duke died and became the executor of the Duke Ellington Foundation until his death in 1993. So I chose this because I really liked the title. It's Things Ain't What They Used to Be. And I thought I should check out the lyrics just in case they were a little cheeky, but I'd like to read them. The lyrics go like this. Got so weary of being nothing, felt so dreary just doing nothing. Didn't care ever getting nothing, felt so low. Announcing ain't what they used to be. No use being a Doubting Thomas. No ignoring that rosy promise. Now I know there's a happy story yet to come. It's the dawn of a day of glory, millennium. I tell you, things ain't what they used to be. This was in Ella Fitzgerald's repertoire, and she sang it often. So let's see what I can do this morning. Things ain't what they used to be.